Okay, this is Warren Peterson, and you may have seen me before as the host of the Viva Virtuoso variety show. We're starting something new, and that is a regular weekly live podcast, and it's going to be about music, uh, just like everything I do. Uh, this week's guest, I've reached back into my childhood days where we made music in the merry meadows of Mendham, New Jersey. And I have a great friend, Bill DeMain, with me. For those who don't know Bill, Bill is one half of much acclaimed and widely popular pop music duo. He is also a singer-songwriter, having collaborated with and written before many names you have heard. He also, if that's not enough, is a author and a music journalist. So he has killer writing skills, but even cooler for us, the experience of having discussed and interviewed some of the top names in the business on the craft. So it's with great pleasure that I welcome you to the podcast, Bill.
Thank you, Warren. I'm happy to be here.
And how are things? You're in Nashville right now, right?
Yes, it's a kind of a gloomy, rainy day, about 60 degrees in Nashville. Good day to stay in and get things done.
Okay, well, good day for this, hopefully.
Yes.
So I was hoping we could start with just bio highlights, but rather than just list achievements, of which we could fill the whole show with, maybe talk to me about your journey as a child musician into heading into the path of singer-songwriter up until you found your partner Molly Felder for Swan Dive.
Sure. Well, in high school, I think when I first started to play the guitar, my aspirations were to be a hard rock lead guitar player, like Jimmy Page or Ritchie Blackmore, And I practiced hard, and I really tried to immerse myself in that. I remember I had an old Wallen Sack reel-to-reel, and I would tape solos and slow them down half speed so I could learn them note for note. And I continued on that path for a couple of years. And then actually, when you came into my life, even though we'd known each other casually for a long time, when we got to be better friends and started playing music together, it was the Beatles that pulled us together. And I think that was the seed of me kind of turning away from wanting to be a hard rocker and being more interested in songs. And then when I got in college, that's when things like Elvis Costello and Squeeze were happening. And I really got into all that new wave songwriting and just kind of continued from there and sold my Marshall stack and sold all my electric guitars and stuff. And that brought me to Nashville. And that's, where I sort of got serious. Because before I moved here, I knew a few songwriters. I was living in DC. So I was kind of a big fish there, and then I moved to Nashville and I was plankton, basically, because there's a million songwriters here and everybody's great. So it was humbling, but inspiring too. And that's one of the reasons that I like living here.
And so you spent some time in Nashville, and how did the eventual hookup and the formation of Swan Dive take place from there?
Well, yeah, when I first came here, I thought, well, as long as I'm in Nashville, I need to be writing country music. And I had no background in country music. I mean, the only thing I knew of country music was hee haw, So it was kind of embarrassing me trying to write country music and pretend that I knew something about it. At the same time, my songwriting had started to go in the direction of jazzier things, like Everything But the Girl and Prefab Sprout and Sade. And about a year into my stay in Nashville, I met Molly Felder, who became my singing partner and still is. I mean, we really bonded over a lot of the music that I just mentioned. And it was kind of it was a real eye-opener for me because I realized, okay, good, I don't have to pretend like I'm going to be a country music songwriter. I like country music, but it's not in my heart, you know. So once Molly and I started singing together, and she has such a great voice, you know, a real kind of pure, soulful, melancholy kind of voice that really matched my songwriting. We just kind of took off from there. We were in a band called Wild About Harry for a few years, and then that morphed into Swan Dive.
If that was the beginning of a leap into some pretty wide popularity for you, wasn't it?
Not at first. I mean, you know, we were a Nashville band. Um, we were playing the clubs. We were always trying to get noticed outside of Nashville, playing festivals and, you know, doing the thing that young bands do, trying to get signed, having showcases. Nothing was happening. And then we made a record, you know, on our own, with our own dime, with a guy named Brad Jones, who was a producer here. And at the time, Brad was playing, he was moonlighting, playing bass for Matthew Sweet, power pop guy. And right after we finished our record with Brad, we pressed up a couple copies, and he took some of them on tour with him, and he went to Japan. And he gave them to some people along the way. It's like, this is a really cool new band from Nashville, check them out. And within a couple of months, we had a couple of record labels in Japan calling us. You know, when I got a call from Sony Records, I was like, yeah, right. But it turned out that it was real. And we got signed. We got signed by Sony TriStar, and then we made a record for them. And that began like a whole sort of incredible journey where we were hugely popular. And I mean, it's surreal because we were on the charts, you know, with people like George Michael and Oasis, you know, it's like, and Swan Dive. Like, it almost didn't seem real. And the shows were incredible. And, you know, as close to a Hard Day's Night experience as I'll probably ever have.
So what did that experience, I guess, add to your quiver in terms of future songwriting, future performing?
What did it add to my, I'm sorry, I missed that word.
Quiver,
Quiver? Okay.
your tool set.
Sure.
How did it enhance your skill set?
Well, I think the main thing is it gave us an audience. You know, suddenly people were waiting for the next Swan Dive record. And when you have that kind of impetus, it really focuses your songwriting because you have a reason, you know, to write the next 10 or 12 songs. And also, I think when we went there, people responded to certain things that we had been doing anyway and not really thinking much about. In fact, when we first went, because I think we were a boy and girl, and Molly played drums and sang, we got compared to the Carpenters a lot. And I started to realize that people were responding to this kind of, you know, more sophisticated chord changes and stuff that was always there. But I think once I knew that the audience liked it, it wasn't that I was, you know, I wanted to pander to what they liked, but it was like, oh, it's okay for me to even go deeper on this stuff, you know, and really bring out elements of bossa nova and elements of brill building pop and Burt Bacharach. And so it helped focus us. I think that's the main thing it did.
You talk about how it changed your, it sounds like a little bit of your harmonic approach even into some more sophisticated stuff. I do remember from our old high school days how everything seemed to be power chords, and it was probably a few years later we met up through some chance, and you were playing stuff for me. All of a sudden, you know, suspended 4/9s and flat 13s and all of these more jazzy, I guess you would say, chord progressions on the guitar. And I was wondering, did Bill always have that in him, or was that something that he developed over time? And how did that kind of evolve for you?
I think it was in my ears when I was a kid, because my dad and my mom both had a really big record collection, and they loved Sinatra and Nat King Cole and Ella Fitzgerald and Four Freshmen and Joe Beam. So I heard all that stuff, whether I wanted to or not. As a kid, you hear it and it goes in, and then at some point you want to rebel and you don't want to like it. But when you come out the other side of the rebellion, you start to realize that you know all those songs and that they're great. So then it was just a matter of, I was lucky enough, the first band I was in, Here Wild About Harry, we had a multi-instrumentalist who was a really great guitar player, much better than me, in fact. And he taught me a lot of stuff and really kind of got me deeper into more sophisticated chord changes and things like that. So I think it was a combination of early listening and then being in Nashville surrounded by people who are so musical.
And now, while all this is going on, you have this other kind of counter personality as Bill DeMain, music journalist. And I'm really interested in knowing how you sort of, it's not something that I'm going to be a music journalist and you just start writing something and it appears in Rolling Stone or something. So can you tell me how you broke into that field? Because a lot of people interested in that.
Yeah, I mean, I think first of all, I always liked to write. Even when I was a kid, I wrote poems and stories, and um, by the time I was writing songs, I was also journaling a lot. So the prose was already in motion, and I think early on in the early '90s, I realized, long before we went to Japan, that I wasn't going to be able to make a living completely from being a musician. It just wasn't going to happen, especially in Nashville, where it's so competitive. So I thought, well, why don't I try to write articles for magazines? And I got lucky, kind of beginner's luck. The first couple of stories that I pitched got picked up by Entertainment Weekly, which is a pretty big magazine, and that led me to more music publications. There was one called Song Talk. Then there was a magazine here in Nashville through the '90s called Performing Songwriter, and I was their senior writer. And basically, my gig was to interview famous songwriters and ask them questions about their creative process, which is the dream job for somebody who's a songwriter, because uh, you basically get to find out how Neil Finn or Amy Mann or Billy Joel or David Bowie write songs. And I picked up so many tricks and so many bits of inspiration that fed my own songwriting. So it was an incredible, kind of symbiotic relationship between journalism and songwriting.
Were you amazed when you got your first paycheck? Like, you're actually paying me for doing this?
I was. And it's funny because magazines, magazines in the '90s used to pay more than they do now. The journalism, I think because once everything went online and it became cheaper, a lot of magazines went out of business, and then they had to, refigure their payment streams. But yeah, it was an exciting. I think the two most exciting checks I ever got were the first one from Entertainment Weekly. I wrote a piece about Tarzan, the original Tarzan movie, and I got a check for, I think, $900, which was a massive amount of money. And then the first royalty check I got from Japan, that was really exciting too. The kinds of things, like, I suppose I should have framed them and put them on the wall, but I don't even remember what I bought, but I'm sure I bought myself something. I treated myself to something.
Well, and what through all those interviews with so many famous people, if you were to try to condense some of the real key learnings that affected you as a songwriter. Uh, what people taught you, what lessons that really have stuck with you, that have become part of your credo as a songwriter?
There's a lot of bits and pieces that I keep in mind. I think I would start with Neil Finn from Crowded House, who's one of my favorites. I always remember one thing that he said to me that I think is the most important thing if you're going to write songs. He said 80% of writing a song is believing that you can do it. And that sounds really simple. And your belief in whether you can do it over time will vary, according to your whatever's going on and your self-esteem and confidence levels. But there is a deep truth to that. A big part of writing songs is believing that you can do it, and gathering the belief comes from doing it a lot. I think almost every songwriter I interviewed stressed the importance of doing it a lot. I'll quote another guy who I really love, Andy Partridge from XTC, brilliant songwriter. Something he said was, "You have to shovel a lot of coal to find a diamond." And I'm listening to Andy Partridge, all these incredible records like Murmur and None Such, and Skylarking. And I'm thinking, God, he can't write a bad song. So for him to tell me he's got to shovel a lot of coal to find a diamond is really affirming to me. Then there's other, I think about David Bowie a lot because he's one of my favorites. And I got to spend an hour with him in New York City, just like, from here to there, which was sometimes when you meet people that are like your idols, even though I had met a lot of famous people before him, I got really nervous and flustered, but he was so welcoming and nice and warm and everything. Anyway, Bowie talked about the importance of returning to what he called beginner's mind. And in Zen meditation, beginner's mind is that place where you return to where your mind is kind of, square one, clear, and how that works with creative process. Bowie said he always tried to remember why he was excited in the first place about writing songs and how it felt to discover things. And I think that's really important because one of the things that can happen when you write a lot of songs over time, or do anything creative over time, is you can get in ruts. So the idea of returning to this place where not only you try to recapture your enthusiasm, but maybe you even give yourself like parameters. Like Bowie told me that, well into his career, sometimes he would say, okay, I'm going to write a song with only these 4 chords. And maybe the 4th chord was totally unrelated. So maybe it was, in the key of B, like B, E, F sharp, and then D, a chord that's like a little outside the key. And then limiting himself to those 4 chords would sort of, box him into this place where he had to think creatively. So that, that along with the beginner's mind thing, there's lots of little tricks, like I said, that you pick up. And also, I think work ethic would be the last thing I would say. And I'll just pick Hal David at random, one of my favorite lyricists, wrote all the great songs with Burt Bacharach. Hal David told me that, he, in some respects, he had a natural flair for lyrics, but he said he would also labor for hours, days, and weeks sometimes over whether but or and was the right word, and that always stuck with me too, because I think every word counts, like, especially when you're writing lyrics, because I write a lot of lyrics with other people, like I collaborate a lot. So a lot of times I'm not even thinking about music of my own. I'm writing to somebody else's melody. And I think about Hal David a lot. It's like, really, is and doing a better job here than but would be? Or should I find a way to use neither of them, So those are a couple examples of things that I might have learned anyway, but to get them from the mouths of the masters is pretty cool.
Pretty nifty indeed. And it's interesting when you talk about the deliberation into you know, and versus but, and these very, very seemingly trivial but massively important, possibly decisions you make. And you wonder how the guys back in the day, back in Tin Pan Alley, back in the early days of Broadway, where, you know, it was a machine. You had investors, you had a show. The show had to be on by, you know, April 1st, and, you know, no one got paid if you didn't, and you just had to mill these songs out. Yet we, you know, we got Rogers and Lorenz Hart, we got Cole Porter, we got the Gershwin brothers, we got like the contrast in work modalities kind of amazes me, and I'm wondering how that was possible, and if any of your interviews you got insights into that.
You know, in the early days when I first started to do songwriter interviews, there were still some of the old Tin Pan Alley guys around. And I did get to talk to people like Burton Lane, you know, who wrote Old Devil Moon and How Are Things in Glockamora, and Mitchell Parrish, the lyricist on Stardust, you know, and Stars Fell in Alabama, and Jerry Herman, who wrote Hello Dolly. My overall impression is that those guys, first of all, they all started young. They sort of all had mentors. Like Jerry Herman's mentor was Frank Lesser, and they all came up with a really strong work ethic. And I think because they were working in the context of the people that you just mentioned. I mean, imagine writing songs at the same time as Cole Porter and Rogers and Hart. I mean, you'd have to be on your game. Like, you couldn't turn out any half-assed stuff, you know? So I think that the tone back then was so elevated. And there's also, you know, you hear the word zeitgeist a lot, but I really believe that there was a time in the 30s and 40s where people were maybe more accepting of more sophisticated harmonic stuff, more sophisticated language, you know, more innuendo, more poetic flourishes. And I think all that stuff came into play with people's own talents and their own work ethic and then a bit of magic too. I mean, there's no other way to say it. Like, a lot of those songs, you can tell there's a lot of hard work behind them, but at the same time, they seem effortless and magical somehow. So there's a lot going on there. I mean, that's something for you and I to write a book about together, you know.
There you go. Well, we're both fans, so and it's rich with information. Now, in your own songwriting, it seems to me anyway that you freely and sometimes sentimentally pay homage to other famous songwriters or performers of the past. I think of songs that bring back the Swingle Singers and Prado and Buddy Holly. I hear a lot of these influences, like pretty profoundly, you know, not hidden, not subtle at all. Yet you're not copying them, and I'm wondering what it is. You know, how do you walk that tightrope where you're saying, "Hey, I love this. I'm doing this. Maybe it's in tribute, but I'm not a copycat."
Yeah, I mean, I think just writing and being alive now is one advantage, because you're not going to be able to get away with, you know, using language that might have worked in the 40s and 50s, unless you're writing a pastiche kind of thing on purpose. I think also that collaborating with people helps, because then, left to my own devices, I might go too far down the rabbit hole in trying to pretend it is 1951, and and that I'm writing for Louis Jordan in the Timpani Five. But if I'm writing with somebody who might know that music but doesn't have as deep a connection to me, that will help bring the song to a different place. Like, I'll give you an example. I wrote a song about 2 years ago with a really talented singer here named Mary Bragg. And the song, I had started it. It's called I Thought You Were Somebody Else. And it came out of a real life thing where I thought I saw an old girlfriend of mine and I waved to her, and as she got closer, she was like, "What?" And it wasn't her. And I said, "Oh, I'm sorry. I thought you were somebody else." And I thought, man, that's a great title for a song. So we wrote this song that could have been like straight ahead Patsy Cline, but Mary's influence was such, she's more contemporary, that it brought it to a different place. So I think collaborating with other people can really help keep it from just becoming straight pastiche.
And I think we have some questions for you that
Oh, really?
hopefully I'm not sure what they are, but hopefully we'll find out in a moment here what our Q&A is.
Okay.
1 second. See if our producer has those for us. Okay, first question is, in your writing process, where do you start?
All different places. Sometimes I'll write a complete lyric with the idea that I'm going to give it to one of my collaborators who is a particularly gifted melody writer. Sometimes I'll just be noodling around on the guitar or the piano, and I'll hit on a sequence of chords with the melody. Sometimes, like I said, a real life incident, like seeing what I thought was my ex-girlfriend and then saying I thought you were somebody else. I think when you're a songwriter, you have to have your antenna up and open all the time, because songs can come from all different kinds of places, whether it's just a snippet or of somebody's conversation, or you hit a chord or you make a mistake. I think a lot of songs come from mistakes, like you're playing one thing and you hit something that's not quite right, but it sounds like something that triggers a new idea. So yeah, there is no one place.
Okay. And a listener wants to know, as in, what were your worst and best interview experiences?
Well, let me flip that and say best and worst.
Okay.
I think my best would be a three-way tie: David Bowie, Dolly Parton, and Billy Joel. All for different reasons, but mostly because I found all of them. They were all in-person interviews, for one thing, but I found all of them to be really candid and really smart and articulate about the creative process. And just, I felt inspired to be in the presence of all three of them in different ways. I've been lucky, I've done hundreds of interviews, and I think I've only had 3 or 4 duds. And sometimes you have to give people the benefit of the doubt, because they might be having a bad day, or they've just done 20 interviews in a day and you're the 21st, But I'll just say that the 2 worst interviews I ever had were Neil Sedaka. I didn't have a lot invested in that. I've never been that big of a fan. I respected him and still do, but I found him to be really unpleasant, and really defensive about his legacy. And I kind of understand, because other people like Carole King and Burt Bacharach, that were his contemporaries, have risen to this pantheon while Neil hasn't quite. The other one was a bit more painful. It was Daryl Hall, because I'm a huge Hall & Oates fan. And he was such a dick to me that it took me about 2 years before I could listen to Hall & Oates again. I've since forgiven him. And I still think he's brilliant. I love him. He's a great songwriter and singer. But I have heard from people, I have a friend who played in Hall & Oates in their touring band and stuff. And, Daryl's a handful. So, it comes with the territory sometimes.
Well, at least you're not still carrying the baggage around.
I'm not carrying the baggage around, but
not the kind of axe you want to grind, I suppose. What was the one you were most nervous for?
I think it was my first one. it was a telephone interview with Antonio Carlos Jobim. So imagine, I've never interviewed anybody before. I don't really even know how to do it. I was reading a book called How to Interview People. I remember that. And it was a telephone interview with somebody whose English was so-so, who was also one of my idols. I mean, there was a lot going on in that phone conversation. And the interview kind of got away from me. You know, I didn't ask the kind of questions that I should have if I could have done that interview 2 or 3 years later. But that was the one I was visibly shaking. I mean, he couldn't see me, but I was on the phone, you know, my voice was shaking.
Uh, yeah, well, that's you're talking about kind of a super heavyweight,
Yeah, he's a
three-time title belt.
yeah.
So understandable. Another question: how has the pandemic affected your work or inspired what you're going to do next?
Well, I think the most profound way that it's affected my work is that I, in an ordinary year, do a lot of co-writing, in-person co-writing, both with people in Nashville, and every year for the last, you know, before the pandemic, for the last 10, 15 years, I would go to LA, I would go to London, spend a week or two, and just write every day with different people. I didn't get to do that last year. So that was a significant thing. And Zoom co-writing, even though I tried it, it doesn't really work so well. So I wasn't as productive as I usually am. That's one thing. As far as inspiring me, I will say, you know, in the early days of the pandemic, I co-wrote a song long distance with a friend of mine named Larry Goldings, who's a great piano player. He's James Taylor's piano player and a jazz guy too. And we wrote a song called Shut-ins that a singer named Curtis Stigers recorded. And I didn't write it. I just wrote it. I have a long distance girlfriend, and I just wrote it about me and her because we both don't really like to go out. And it was just kind of a sweet song. And then it ended up taking on this whole other element. You can find the song online. It sounds like a pandemic love song, you know, and NPR did a thing about it. And so that was an inspiring bit. As far as what he's doing next, I don't know. What I'm doing next is hopefully getting a vaccine that will lead to what I'm doing next.
Now, I did hear some of your recent work, and I have to tell you, I was really impressed with the acapella. I think you did.
Oh yeah.
Listen to was "Me and My Arrow," which I just brings me back to some. I remember sitting in front of the television set with my, you know, how kids sit with their legs splayed out, watching that the first time and just falling in love with the song. And but doing it a cappella like that, wow, that's like you have no safety net for that, do you really?
Yeah, it was a challenge. And I will say that Harry Nilsson is maybe my favorite songwriter and singer. If I had to pick, you know, desert island kind of disc, or at least equal with the Beatles. And it's funny that the Beatles loved Harry Nilsson so much he was almost like a sixth Beatle. But yeah, I had done an a cappella version of Wendy by the Beach Boys on the last record I made. And that was the first time I ever tried something like that. Because I didn't do, my singing partner Molly is such a pro at, you know, she's a studio singer and toured with Don Henley and stuff like that. And she's a real pro at harmony stuff. And I always felt a little intimidated because she's so quick and so good at it. So when I started to do it at home, it took me a while to kind of build up the confidence and find how to do it. But Me and My Arrow was really fun because I was just kind of making it up as I was going. Like I played it on piano first and sang a lead scratch vocal, and then took the piano away and started building it up bit by bit, you know, sometimes erasing stuff. But thanks for bringing that up. I was really proud of that too.
Yeah. Oh, very enjoyable too. Everyone should check it out. Um, Another song, question about one of your songs. This one, "Flip Side of Loving You,"
Yeah,
and
who's asking these questions? I want to know. Do you see a name?
uh, Joe. Joe is asking the questions. No,
Really? Okay.
I unfortunately don't have a name. I just have I have what the question is. So
Flip Side of Loving You is about relationship difficulties, but set to a perky tune. What inspired that? Do you like just juxtaposing moods like that? Um, yeah, I'll say that Flip Side of Loving You was written with one of my favorite co-writers, a woman named Kelly Jones, who lives in Los Angeles. Kelly is an incredible singer and songwriter, somebody I was a fan of before I got to know. And we've written, she's just one of my favorite people to write with. We always have so much fun and consistently write things that I like. And I remember that song, um, we were listening to a lot of kind of 70s soul, and we wanted to have those kind of chord changes in it. Lots of minor sevenths and, 4/5 kind of chords. So we used a lot of those. And then, yes, juxtaposing moods is always a great trick for songwriting. You have a jaunty tune and then I think it deepens it, if you put something that's a little more melancholy or heartbreak with it. But yeah, I thought that song, that was one of my favorites on the last record we made. So thanks for bringing that up. It's really nice.
one song I'd like to ask you about, because in preparing for this, I want to refamiliarize myself with your catalog, but
Uh-huh.
it turned out that it was just I had it on YouTube just playing in whatever their continuous cycle mode, and watching it as well as listening to it was just repeatedly so enjoyable, and that was Until. Um,
Oh,
so
yeah.
and I'd like to hear just where that came from.
Well, that song was written once we decided to make a bossa nova record. We knew the next Swan Dive record we were going to do just go all in. We had flirted with bossa nova, one or two songs per record up till then. I think we'd made like 5 records before that. And we decided let's just go all the way and just do a bossa record. So that really focused the songwriting. And right around that time, um, I met a singer who became another co-writer of mine, a woman named Juliana Ray, also from Los Angeles. And Juliana came to Nashville to do like a songwriters week, and we got together. And I remember I had that idea. I love the idea of every line of the lyric kind of ending, with until, like an ellipsis, like where it would be a love song, but you would also be acknowledging that, lots of things can happen to get in the way of love, and there's no guarantee. And I was also listening to a lot of Michel Legrand,
Mm.
the great French composer. In particular, there's a great French movie called Cleo from 5 to 7, a black and white kind of new wave movie that Legrand is actually in, but he wrote the songs for it. And I remember putting that record on while Juliana was over, and it was like, let's do something like that, like super Frenchy bossa, and that's how Until happened.
Wow, wow, it's just powerfully good. So
Thanks. Yeah, and Molly's vocal on that song is phenomenal. I mean, she's just such a great singer.
yeah, yeah, it just it takes you into a different atmosphere. Uh, so you, Bill, have had the benefit of getting all this advice and counsel from, the pantheon of the best songwriters out there. What for the songwriter, for the practicing or working songwriter, what advice would you have for them?
I would say the more songs that you write, again, the better chance you have of writing a good one or a great one. So you really do have to do it all the time, or as much as you can. I also think it's good to have a couple of songs on the go at any one time, so it's not like you're just putting one cake in the oven, and if the cake doesn't come out, you're disappointed. Listen to a lot of stuff, study the masters, learn, dissect songs. I still do that. I did it a lot more when I was younger, but like, for instance, I was just learning the song My Old Flame, which is an old standard. And I find that when I learn songs that I don't really know, there'll always be something in it, like a chord change that I haven't thought about before. It's like, whoa, I got to use that, So I think listening and learning is a huge part of writing. And then also be honest with yourself. If you're a better lyric writer than a melody writer, find somebody who's a great melody writer and collaborate. I wrote songs on my own for a long time and still do somewhat, but I enjoy collaborating more than writing on my own. And I've really collaborated with a lot of people and found 5 or 6 who are sort of my core group who do things that I can't do, so we have a nice creative combination that way. But that's my advice.
So everybody listen to Bill.
Listen to
He's
me.
been there, done that. It's a long T-shirt inscription, but good advice. Bill, I think we're going to wrap it up, but I want to give you the opportunity. Where can people find your work? Whether it's Swan Dive, your other collaborations, your writing. Give us a hint.
Well, I would send you to iTunes store. I think all the Swan Dive records and my solo records are on there, as well as things like the record I wrote with Teddy Thompson and Kelly Jones. If you want to listen for free, some of it is on Spotify, not all of it. A couple of the Swan Dive records are missing. You can buy things on Amazon. A lot of the records we made, in Japan and Korea are out of print, and you might have to go to eBay. You might find them for a song, or you might find them for 3 songs. The couple of books that I've written are all on Amazon. And also I have, for my new stuff, like the Harry Nilsson song we were talking about, the a cappella cover, I have a Bandcamp page under my name. So those are a few places. But for Swan Dive, I would say iTunes is a good bet.
Great. And anything you'd like to say to our audience before we wrap things up? Or
I would just like to say, I know that everybody right now is really restless and really uncertain about the future. I mean, no matter who you are or what you're doing, I think, we're all quarantine weary, and we're all hopeful. And I have no idea what's going to happen, but I want to just say, hang in there. I really think on the other side of this, whether it's the end of 2021 or maybe 2022, I think that there's a good chance that we might see a kind of renaissance, a jazz age, a flowering, not only of relief that we can go back to a kind of world that we recognize, but that it might be a world that has a deeper understanding between people, deeper love, and a deeper creativity. That's my hope.
Wow, what a profound way to end things.
Yeah,
but that's you. Bill, it has been great and an honor to have you as my first podcast guest. You have made it very easy for me, and I am most appreciative of that. I suppose you've been in my chair a few times, but just really hats off to you, your opus of work, and we wish you all success and great things in the future, and look forward to a day where, hey, I can see you again and we can meet up, have a little fun, and maybe do a little collaborating of our own.
man, I look forward to that day too. And it's so great to talk to you, and it's so great to such a comfort for me too to talk to somebody that I have such a long history with, you know, because I really do have such fond memories, not only of your amazing piano playing, you know, but also being in a band together, and you know, like we were kind of nerdy and like outsiders, and that meant so much to find a like-minded person and just like bond. So it's great to reestablish that connection. Thank you.
Likewise, and now you know all of our secrets, right?
You know all of our secrets.
Okay, Bill. Well, thank you, and we'll do this again, hopefully someday soon. And for our audience members, um, these will be coming weekly. So if you like this, please like, subscribe. I know there's all these things you're supposed to hit and punch and buzz, and don't get too violent, but do what you can to keep in touch with our different channels. I know our future guest is a uh, famous opera singer with kind of some special things going on. So we hope you'll be listening for that next week. And thank you. And with that, it's a wrap.